Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here in the Barbados Pavilion or online from wherever you are. This afternoon, as part of our Roofs to Reefs program series here at the Barbados Pavilion, we are going to have a conversation with you about the HOPE program, Home Ownership Providing Energy, looking at this from the perspective of upscaling from 200 to 10,000, thinking through that upscaling of a promising flagship resilient housing initiative. So in concept, what is the HOPE program? This is something that combines high-quality, resilient, and sustainable built environment design with an innovative financing model to deliver affordable, resilient homes to low and middle-income first-time home buyers. So let's unpack that a little bit. Resilient built environment, innovative financing model. Let me turn to the Roofs to Reefs program director to give us a bit of an introduction and just tell us a little bit about the origins of this program and the concept.
Thank you very much, Karima. The HOPE program starts with the acronym HOPE, Home Ownership Providing Energy. And it is part of the overall Roofs to Reefs suite that we are working on to build climate resilience in Barbados. And this is a very important component of that overall suite because it really speaks to bringing the impact to where you live, literally at home. So when you look at Roofs to Reefs, it speaks at the country level, at the community level, and at the individual level. So at the country level, you can see the roof as being the topmost ridge of the country. At the community level, you're talking about your community center, your supermarket, your corner shop, the things that hold the community together, your church, that sort of thing. And then at the individual level, you're talking about the roof of your dwelling place. And that is literally what Roofs to Reefs is about, moving from the roof to the reef and beyond. Roofs to Reefs identifies 6 main impact sectors: water, waste, energy, land use, including agriculture and infrastructure and utilities, ecosystems, and of course, housing. And this is where HOPE comes in. It is part of our overall approach to building climate resilience in the housing sector in Barbados. And HOPE specifically targets the opportunity to provide those climate resilient homes to first-time homeowners, people who are now really starting out in life, persons who may be teachers, clerical officers, police officers, persons who work as clerks in banks, young people coming in as accounting clerks and junior accountants and so forth, those persons in that sort of sphere. And the idea overall behind it is to look at how you can ensure that you have the sort of structure that can survive a Category 3, Category 4 event while giving people the assurance that they have an investment that will take them forward into the future.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think that one of the things that interests me most about the HOPE program is the idea that we are making these resilience and sustainability features in homes accessible to the average person. So that this is not something then that is only accessible to certain sectors of the society that can afford it, but we're making these things accessible to the wider society. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Yannick Glamaric, who is our Special Envoy on Climate Action, formerly the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Now, we've talked a lot about HOPE, Yannick, and I know that this is a project that's sort of taken your interest a bit. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you think is so interesting about HOPE and why it stands out for you in terms of the creativity in that design.
Well, the first time I read about HOPE, I was really taken because my immediate reaction was, wow, this is very innovative. This is a breakthrough. It's something that could be of relevance globally. I must have been involved in about 1,000 projects, climate projects in my career. And the best projects are the projects that are climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and development. We, in this COP, we speak a lot about the fact that every single decimal of a Celsius degree count in terms of damage. But for people who are close to the poverty line, every single penny does count. And the type of acceleration of climate investment that we need to see happening will not take place if it's not fair, if it's not just. And HOPE basically is trying to do to achieve a breakthrough in terms of climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and fair transition development. The concept, the financial mechanism envisaged is very smart. What does block low-income country from acceding to properties? They don't have a collateral. It's very expensive to be poor. When you are poor, you pay often 10, 20 times more for the same service, water or energy, than the rich. When you are poor, nobody lends you money. We lend money only to the rich. And so when you are poor, a bank is not to give you money for home ownership because you don't have a collateral. And therefore, you will keep paying a rent your entire life, and you will never build any kind of housing equity. Right from the beginning, you are basically in an extremely difficult category. What does HOPE does? HOPE leverage the economies of scales, of mass procurement. Rather than building one house, it's building 200 houses in a go, and plan to go up to 10,000 houses. And when you have this kind of economies of scale, the cost of an individual house goes down quite dramatically. In addition, HOPE, by basically putting PVs on every single roof and creating a special company to exploit, to operate these PVs and generate income from it, can even further reduce the cost of the house. And by basically expediting, facilitating, and subsidizing the purchase of land, can de facto allocate to low-income houses that are maybe 70% of the price of the market. What does it mean? Is that suddenly a low income can go to a bank and say, give me a loan, I have 30% of collateral. I'm asking only for 70% of the price of the house. And for the banker, it means that if you have a downturn in terms of housing market, it's fine. If there is a credit default and a downturn, they still recover money. So HOPE de facto is creating collaterals for low income. And not only that, it's creating collateral for low income for climate resilient houses that are resilient up to hurricane category 3. And in addition, is financing this through clean energy technology, where the shift from fossil fuel, it's not a development constraint, it's actually a development accelerator for a fair and just transition. So when I look at when I saw this project for the first time, I thought, wow, they have resolved the quadrature of the circle.
Thank you so much, Yannick. I'll pick up here on what you were saying about the best projects combining mitigation, adaptation, and development. I think that's a point that's come out in a couple of the panels that we've had at the pavilion here, in that these things really are much more sort of synergistic and interactive than we often see them being presented. We had one panelist a few days ago that he said, you know, that you really can't, or we should not be trying to separate prosperity and resilience. And I think that is what is so interesting about the HOPE project, in that it gives us a package where we are delivering on both of those things and doing something that is helping to build prosperity while making resilient housing accessible to the average person. And the concept is also interesting because we're able to present a model in terms of a financial model for something that makes sense and shifts an equation to make something possible. But we're also presenting a model in terms of built environment and a series of resilient built environment features incorporated into the development, and what we might call low impact development is sort of an overarching term for that. So I'm going to turn back to Ricardo here and let him tell you a bit about just those resilient built environment features. So we see how we're sort of blending the finance creativity and the built environment best practice here in one project.
Thank you so much, Karim. And you really can speak about mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage all at the same time under this project. And if you start with mitigation, that is absolutely baked into this project concept from the outset. The idea is that you are allowing individuals to be able to go to a mortgage provider with collateral in hand, because the government is providing the roads and the additional support services that will allow for the beginning of the development in the area, including the placement of solar photovoltaic panels on the roofs of the home. And that is how government is earning back the money that they're putting in to the road and utility and service development that is going in. That allows the individual homeowner to approach, as Yannick said, with collateral, essentially cash in hand, to be able to move the process forward and to make the house itself much less expensive for the person who's doing that. And so you start there with that sort of package and understanding it in that respect. But of course, you're also addressing lowering GHG emissions through reducing fossil fuel use, because you're using the panels to provide electricity. That is just the start, however, because when you look at the design of the home as well as specific features, you are building in adaptation and climate resilience. So the homes themselves, you will look at the angle of the roof. The angle of the roof is important, not just for getting your solar panels to be efficient, but also providing that pitch of above 30 degrees to allow for storm force winds and hurricane force winds to be able to pass over it in the most effective way. There's very little overhang of the roof, so the wind is not able to get under the eaves of the house and lift the roof off. In addition, we have hurricane straps built in and tied in to the rest of the structure, so that you're tying the roof in to your ring beam and to the rest of your structure, so that you have a much stronger roof. And the roof starts off as the first and most critical point of weakness when you're dealing with structures and surviving hurricane force winds. The homes themselves as well have doors and windows that have been selected to be able to withstand a Category 3 event. The homes are also elevated so that you can get that protection and that storm water management and storm water impact and flooding alleviation. We also have provisions for rainwater harvesting to allow persons to be able to utilize the water that runs off of the roof. In addition, we also have opportunities looking at permeable paving to be able to facilitate putting water back to ground. In addition, of course, what we're doing by taking this approach is to strengthen the overall housing units in Barbados and our overall housing stock, so that you're building resilience in that way. And that is critical, because when you're on the front lines of a climate crisis like we are, there's no development that you can afford to do that does not integrate climate resilience.
Thank you, Ricardo. I'll just sort of pull out and emphasize a bit here the roofs aspect of this in terms of the importance of the roof and the structure, and then in the Roofs to Reefs program overall. We heard in the launch of the Barbados Pavilion, PM Motley touched a little bit on roofs and roofs to reefs, and going back to the history of a significant hurricane impact in Barbados in 1940. We don't always think about, when we think about losses after events like that, we didn't just have loss and damage to physical structures. We had a loss of construction best practice. That's what the PM was saying to us, that essentially in our building back, we didn't build back better. We reverted to a simpler construction just to get the roofs back on people's houses. But with that, we lost the best practice in terms of the angle of the roof and all of the benefits that gives in terms of both resilience and passive cooling. And so part of what we're doing here with projects and programs like COPE, and generally with the Roofs to Reefs program, is combining new technologies like hurricane straps and like the solar PVs with a reverting back to established best practice in order to build that resilience. So we've talked quite a bit now about the physical built environment features of the HOPE program, and both Ricky and Yannick have talked to us a little bit about the financial model and how that is helping to deliver both prosperity and resilience. But the thing is that right now, this is at pilot stage. So we've got 200 homes, thereabouts, sort of in construction. We were having a sort of an informal conversation here just before the event in terms of who's applied, who's interested. It's oversubscribed. It's massively oversubscribed. So there's demand in that sense. And we know that there's a need in terms of the resilience building. So where do we go from here in terms of 200 to, say, 10,000? So I'm going to turn back to Yannick here for this. And we've had a lot of conversations about upscaling and the changing nature of risk with upscaling. So maybe, Yannick, unpack for us a little bit first kind of the generalities of pilot upscaling, and then we can talk more specifically about how that relates to HOPE.
The most pilot projects, successful pilot projects, do not scale up. And this is always a major source of frustration for the champions of these projects, because the pilot was working. So why can't we simply increase it by 50 times? And most of these pilot projects never, ever, ever scale up. It's extremely problematic, because if we want to accelerate the transition toward the net zero climate resilient development, we need to be able to establish pilots that are scalable for financiers to be able to engage. So why do most pilot projects not scale up? It's because basically the universe of risk change and increase with size. Something that we all know intuitively, actually, but we seem to forget when we move to project development. It's the first thing that a banker will do when you come with a project is to analyze the risk. Economists think in terms of price signal. Actually, investors think in terms of risk signal. They will always look at the risk and after whether the reward is commensurate with the risk. And so the first thing I did when I had a look at Barbados was to list every possible risk, everything that could go wrong with this initiative. And I came with 20 categories of risk. And for the pilot project, I had only one high risk and 5 low risk. The one high risk was actually the risk of a hurricane that destroyed the house. And as Ricardo has mentioned it, the entire project is about mitigating that risk. And the rest, all the other risks were relatively minor. When I moved to 10,000 houses, I ended up with 9 high risk, and if my memory is correct, 5 or 6 moderate risk, and the rest low risk. Why? Let's take an example. In terms of financial model, HOP depends very much on selling the PV electricity to the grid. Right now, with 200 houses, we're speaking with 5 kilowatt per house, we're speaking about 1 megawatt. In a grid that basically manage 170 megawatt, it should be okay. You are far, far, far from any kind of thermal limits. And in addition, the government of Barbados is increasing the feed-in tariff from 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt. So it's not a risk, not even worth considering it as a risk with 200 houses. When you move to 10,000 houses, it's 50 megawatt that you suddenly have to inject in the grid. And it's a completely different picture here. And so there is a risk that you will not have access to the grid. And no amount of political pressure will make a difference if your grid is not able to accept this kind of viable energy. The same thing, the risk that you are not to be paid with 200 houses, what we call the off-taker risk, is negligible. For power utility, accepting 1 megawatt, it's fine. Normally, they have the financial resources to do that. 50 megawatt at a privileged feed-in tariff, it's a completely different ballgame. And so suddenly your off-taker risk that was next to zero at the pilot level becomes very big at the scale-up level. You were speaking about departition of skills. It's when you develop 200 houses, you will take the best contractors. You will have one quality engineer on the back of this contractor. So the likelihood to have poor workmanship is fairly low. Well, when you move to 10,000 houses, you will need a lot of people who have the skill to do this kind of roof strapping. The Prime Minister Miamudle was speaking about people who could not come with slatted roof anymore after Hurricane Janet. Here you are speaking about an extremely innovative but also complex way of doing roof. And so the risk of poor workmanship becomes extremely important. In terms of financing, in terms of insurances, one of the reasons why hurricane is not a problem with 200 houses is because first, it's designed to withstand a hurricane category 3, and if you get a 4 and a 5, the insurance policy will cover the difference. Well, is your insurer able to cover 30% of the 10,000 houses being damaged? Because there you need a reinsurer. So I know that Barbados has just introduced with the FSC insurer test, but it's a major risk that will have to be taken into consideration. In terms of finance, the pilot stage is financed thanks to public equity. Public equity, free public equity, is not an insignificant amount. Except that for 10,000 houses, your public equity might be anywhere between $100 to $200 million. And there, the question is, where is it to come from? And so, for scaling up Project HOP, we need to systematically go after every single risk and make sure that when we go to see a banker, we put on the table a risk mitigation sheet that shows that we have taken care of everything. And there, we will be able to scale up the project. So I hope, I'm sorry if I were a bit long, but I hope it's explained why often successful pilot projects do not scale up.
Thank you so much, Yannick. And I think the sort of very simplified version of that I will give you is essentially it is a very different proposition to cook dinner for 20 people than it is to cook dinner for two. So anybody that's ever tried to make a big family dinner, you find it's very different from, just an evening dinner for two. And so then this is probably more like trying to scale that up to making dinner for 2,000 or 20,000. And it's an extremely different proposition. So that very much vastly oversimplifies what Yannick is saying to you, but I think it sort of gets the idea across. And in this instance, hope being what it is, we have risks in the built environment as well as risks in terms of the financial model and how those things fit together that will, the nature of them and the scale of the risk is changing when we're looking at going from 200 to 10,000. And I think what that sort of says to me is that this forces us then to look at the entire system. We cannot look at the project in isolation as this pilot, we're building 200 houses and we're doing this thing. We have to look at where the project is interacting with our wider systems in terms of energy and electricity supply, in terms of our capacity for construction and building in that sector. So those are two broader systems, and there's probably more if we think about it, but those are the two that come to mind. Those are two broader systems that this project sort of nests within because it's reliant on those systems to be successful. So maybe Ricky can talk to us a little bit more about that kind of systemic thinking approach that we need to take as Barbados and how that sort of fits in. I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but you can handle it with the Roofs to Reefs program.
Thank you so much, Karima. And one of the key things when doing a program like this is to understand that interconnectivity and to start at the top. And so when you look at what we've been doing in Barbados, we've been building out this sort of policy framework that allows us to address these issues. So when you look at that national level, you will see that we have our revised physical development plan that we're finalizing right now. That relates directly to our Barbados Economic and Sustainability and Transformation Plan, or BERT plan, so our Environmental Resilience and Transformation, to give it its proper title. It is also directly related to our nationally determined contributions, or NDC. We're also right now working on our marine spatial plan. And if you look at all of those, they all reference the Roofs to Reefs program, and the Roofs to Reefs program reference those. And from that interconnectivity that you see there, you will also then see how that then attaches itself to all of the sectoral plans and policies that are coming out there. So key things that you have to work on, including your water sector, your housing sector, your energy sector. And when you look across those spheres, you will see that we have things like wastewater reuse. We have a revised water zoning policy. We're looking at rainwater harvesting and putting guidelines in place for that sort of activity. We're looking at how we do our mains replacement, putting in revolving loan funds to be able to address those matters. They then relate to electricity, for instance, and energy. The largest electricity user on the island is water. And so you can see the link from energy to water to housing, and you just run across all of those sectors. And if you look at the impact sectors that we talked about before, they then link to all of the other sectors, whether it be information technology, it be education, it be health, any of those sectors, you can see those linkages. And so you're taking that holistic, climate resilient approach, and it runs through your economy and your society. And that is critical. You have to change the way people see things, the way they think, and how ready we are as a country to be able to react to those things, so that you get that whole of country approach that addresses both public and private sector and takes us forward in the process.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think another good example there as well is some of the work that we're just starting to look at in terms of resilient standards in building. And I'm sorry we don't have Danny with us at COP this year. That's something we might be able to explore a bit more. But that is, I think it's sometimes not easy to see because it's not very tangible how the link between these policies and then the projects that you see. So HOPE, we can take you to see a house and you can physically look at the house and you can look at the PVs and I can show you a hurricane strap and that helps to bring it home for a lot of people and we need that. But then the enabling environment with the policy setting and some of the other sort of green public financing issues that we haven't had a chance to talk to you about yet, but also those systemic reforms like in the building sector, improvements to the building code and having resilient standards. Those are critical enabling things that are not tangible and obviously visible to the average person, but are critical to the upscaling and expansion of a project like HOPE. I don't think that we want to drone on at you all afternoon. So what I think I will do is ask my panelists if there's anything that they want to add or react to, and then we will maybe take a question or two if there's any, and we will wrap up. So do either of you have anything that you want to add or react to?
Simply to say that your example about how different it is to cook for 2 or 20 or 200 is excellent, because we all know it, but we seem to all forget it when we start designing programs. And regarding your point on policies, for almost every single risk, you need to come with a policy. And one of the 20 risks is the policy risk, the fact that you have not been able to come up with a policy for all the other risks. And it's often the highest risk. So indeed, behind any successful program, you have a good policy framework.
Thanks, Yannick. Anything, Ricky?
Yeah, I think it really would be remiss of me to leave today without speaking about the financial model a little bit more on how we're looking to scale up. This is one of the reasons why we have been working on the development and the establishment of a blue-green bank.
Yes, we should have done.
And that really and truly gives us the opportunity to allow for the financing of projects such as these that will oftentimes have some return on the investment, but need that upfront investment to get things started, to demonstrate the feasibility of the project, to then be in a position so that there's a return that can come back. And a blue-green bank helps you in terms of, especially in areas like housing, in areas like water, to be able to do those critical things, to be able to free up additional finances from government, to be able to address a lot of those adaptation-type needs that don't have a revenue stream that is attached to them. And so oftentimes persons don't see those linkages, but you need to have an approach in your financing that identifies different finance opportunities that better suit different types of developments so that you're preparing a financing package to fit in terms of your investment needs around what your primary needs are with respect to mitigation and adaptation to avoid and avert loss and damage. Because the reality is that we find ourselves on the front lines of a climate crisis, not of our own making, in a world in which we have globally failed to mitigate. While we may feel it is not our individual responsibility, it's something that requires actions from all of us. But that failure to mitigate means that we need to adapt to greater impacts. And adaptation becomes more difficult and more expensive and less effective, the hotter it gets. And loss and damage then is the inevitable result. And that is just speaking on the infrastructure side. Because when it comes to loss and damage and your home, it is as personal an issue as can be. And so as many homes as we can make resilient, as many people as we can seek to shield and to reduce their vulnerabilities, the easier it is for the country to be able to recover. Hope is just one example. We're working on a number of different projects. Even in the housing sector, we can name quite a few more. There's one right now we're working on called Strap It, which is for existing homes and just trying to give packages so that you can increase the resilience of your existing home. We're also looking at an opportunity for existing homes along the same line as Hope, where you can get that resilience and energy efficiency and energy generating component in there. So there's a program that we're developing now called Shift, which is Small Home Income Generating Facilities Trust, or Shift. And we just want to say that it's not just about infrastructure, but it is about economics and about individuals. So you have to look at all three of the legs that exist under sustainable development: your environment, your economy, and your social component.
Thanks, Ricardo. As ever, he's given me an opportunity to make a couple of links. So I will first take the opportunity to make a small plug in terms of the Blue-Green Bank. We did have another conversation on the Blue-Green Bank in the Barbados Pavilion. Everything for me is before rest day and after rest day. So that was, I believe, on the 6th of December.
It was on Wednesday.
Yes. That we had a conversation about the Blue-Green Bank. And so that is available. The recording is available online on the website for the Barbados Pavilion, which you can get on the QR code right here if you're interested in having a look at that. So that's my plug for the Blue-Green Bank. And then as well, now I've lost it.
I would like to come with a
Oh,
plug.
please,
if
please.
If you're already
Please.
out of plug. Because to come back to the point of Ricardo, clearly financing something like that requires a lot of skill. The de facto, for the relationship between the low-income household and the banker to be a traditional one, the finance behind has to be everything but traditional. The HOP incorporation will have to advance all the cost of the construction. And so a gigantic amount of bridging finance. In addition, the developer does not keep any profit. The idea that the developer pass all the profit to the low income to build the collateral of the low income. And so it means that rather than having a margin of 30% on your house, you might end up with a margin of 10% or less. And it means your internal rate of return is low. It means you have to go for sources of finance that are at a very low cost. And you will have to develop some new type of bonds, some new type of SPVs for equity. And so the Blue-Green Bank will have the expertise in-house to be able to enable this kind of financing.
Thanks, Yannick. I will sort of, just again, I had another link that Ricardo gave me an opportunity to make with what he was saying. You know, for the systems thinkers in the room or online, that's what we're talking about here in terms of optimizing the system of the financing and how we approach that by directing the different types of finance where they're most needed and where they make the most sense. And so this gives a nice kind of microcosm relating in what we're doing in the national level to what we've been saying with the Bridgetown Initiative in terms of directing private sector finance where it makes sense, where there's a revenue stream. and then understanding that there are fewer opportunities there with adaptation and resilience building, and talking therefore about the importance of increasing concessional lending in that area. And so HOPE is a great example across a number of spheres in terms of built environment, resilience and sustainability, and creativity, return to best practice, a financial model that I'm using creative instead of innovative. I feel like the word is losing meaning at this point. In the financial model, but also showing that systems thinking across the financial systems as well as the other systems that the project is going to interact with, and giving us an example of what we're seeing in Bridgetown as well, and how we're walking that talk at home. I don't want to sort of drone on about you too much about that anymore, so let me see if there are any questions at this point. Yes.
Support. Okay. Yeah, so the question was about how does HOPE support the local fishermen? And that really is taking you in the link that goes all the way literally from the roof to the reef and beyond. And I genuinely did not prompt this question to come. But what it really shows is the interconnectivity of what it is we're doing. From the time that first drop of rain falls from the sky and makes contact with the roof, that being the topmost ridge of the country, the roof of your community structure, the roof of your individual dwelling place. It is on a journey to the sea. And because of our very unique hydrogeology, that literally means that every drop that falls, that enters the ground, is on a journey to the sea. One of the things that we're working on, not just at HOPE, but also a number of different projects in a number of different sectors, is improving our ability to treat wastewater and improving the quality, therefore, of our groundwater that then enters into our nearshore environment. That affects our coral reefs, that affects our coastal waters, and therefore affects all of the stakeholders in that space, whether or not it be persons just using the beach for recreation, whether it be fisher folk, whether it be divers, whoever else. We already have so many impacts that we cannot control that are external. Warming oceans, increasing ocean acidification. So everything that we can do to improve the quality of our water will redound to the benefit of all of our users, including our fishermen. And so that is really talking about the connectivity as you flow literally from the roof to the reef.
We couldn't have had a better question if we had a plant. Thank you for that. Yes, please.
If we can get a microphone. Yeah, I just want to be able to try and get people to be able to hear.
Yes, of course. Thanks very much for this incredible panel, and it was really enlightening. Thank you, Ricardo, for putting the humanity into the project and really emphasizing that this is about individuals. And Karima, I have more comments coming on yours and Yannick. A number of really important insights made. I will push back a little bit on Yannick because I don't think it's necessarily intuitive that scaling up increases the risk and the cost. I think we're taught or trained to think in economies of scale that and models that exist independently of political economy. So imagining a country with the capacity, it's a very different question. So Karima, I really liked your explanation of cooking dinner for 2 verse 20. That made a lot of sense to me. I would imagine just myself, how would I cook dinner for 20? I don't have the pots and pans. I don't have a big enough stove. But, you can continue the metaphor. So that was very, very persuasive to me. So my takeaway is really that the ability to scale is relative to domestic capacity plus the external risk perception, which, as Avi emphasizes, is not necessarily reflective of the reality. So in a world with limited resources and let's say imperfect assessments of risk, what are the most impactful actions relative to cost that a government can undertake to get to scaling? Is it the policy framework to reduce the risk enough that gives banks confidence to lend or to lend at lower rates? Is it the coordination across ministries or sectors? If you could add a little bit more, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I think I can. One of the reasons why it doesn't seem to be so intuitive. It's because you have different elements moving in different direction. It's actually when your risk universe change. Some risks go down, some risks go up. The more you develop, the larger the volume of any given technology, the lower the cost, the lower the risk of poor technical performance, because you have what we call the learning curve associated with a technology. And so, for example, solar has a great learning curve, 20%. And this means that every time you double the installed capacity of a PV, you reduce by 20% the cost of PV. And because we have been doing it every 2 years, we have been reducing PV by 10% every year. And so this is something extremely powerful. It's certainly the most positive message that we can give in any COP right now. And so, but because of that, we think economy of scale, learning curve, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and less risky. But so the technological performance risk and the technological cost are only two of the risk. And that's the reason why, despite the fact that PV, the cost of PV is going down by 10% every year, it's still mostly used in a limited number of countries, because in other countries you have other risks that are present and have to be dealt with.
Yeah. And if I can add to that as well, it depends on the lens that you are looking at it through at the time that really determines where, from your perspective, you believe the greatest risk reduction can occur. So you have policy, which is very critical, but also things like capacity and capacity building. So for instance, under the HOPE project, in the pilot phase, what we've been doing is allowing small contractors to work on the homes and to be giving them the sort of training programs that are necessary. We've also had a very key component in the engineering supervision. And so for each step of your construction phase, there's that evaluation. You have to pass that. And if your performance is not up to scratch, you're warned on it. You're told what you need to do. And so what we're seeking to do is to build capacity over the duration of what it is we're doing and teach those skills that are so critical. Of course, the other component of it that is essential is a financial services sector that sees you as a partner and moves forward with you, rather than, for instance, seeing you as a competitor. So when we were first talking about the establishment of the Blue-Green Bank, we met with all of the stakeholders involved, including the solar PV and general renewable energy partners, with the wastewater partners, with the banks and other financial institutions, such as the credit unions, so that it can be very clear what the intention is on the project and how you plan to work in partnership. And to use the Karima opportunity, we're also going to be talking a little bit more on the 10th, which is our last event, about partnerships, and that one is going to focus on water and the partnership between the wider government of Barbados, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, and the Barbados Water Authority on specific water projects that we are working on financed actually through the GCF, but also on the wider suite of water-related projects and how all of those are interconnected and utilizing different funding sources and funding models depending on what it is you're dealing with. And so again, when you look at it, the lens of partnership is important, the lens of policy is important, the lens of capacity building is important, the lens of being able to understand how the financial models that you use tie together, and how do you then identify what are the range of investments that you need to have and how best to finance those.
Thank you, Ricardo. I want to go at that one too, actually, but I'll be brief. I think what sort of comes out from your question, and thank you for that, as well as what Yannick and Ricky were saying, is that what interventions are going to have the most impact when we are thinking of upscaling as part of a systemic thing where we're looking at the project in the context of the systems that it is part of and it has to function in, is that is going to be highly sensitive to the country and the place that we're doing it in. And what the most important interventions are, the most impactful ones are, or the greatest needs, however you want to look at that, is going to really depend on what is already there, what the existing capacities are, what the existing systems are like, will define where the needs are and therefore where it's going to be the biggest priority for intervention is. So where is the policy framework at? What are the policy needs? What is the building sector and the current standards and practices like in terms of the energy infrastructure and how that fits in? And I think that for me really drives home something that we talk about a lot in the negotiations, and something that's so core and central is that the adaptation aspect is so country driven. It does not lend to a one size fits all model, and we need these types of critical analyses, and we need the capacity to do these critical analyses and understand place and context when we think about adaptation. So I couldn't resist that opportunity. Thank you very much. We'll take any other questions, or we'll let you go. I will take silence as that we'll let you go.
If I may, Karim, I just wanted to say one last thing.
I have an eager panel.
And that is to bring back into view something that Minister Monroe Knight said this morning in a panel on youth. And that is that Barbados recognizes the fact that the journey is not easy and that we're on the front lines of the climate crisis. But what we have sought to do is to look at how we can develop the types of models and activities that we need that take us forward, that show Barbados as a solutions-oriented country. We don't just want to throw our hands up and lament and say, woe is me. We believe that we can find a way to address these issues, and what we're looking for is the assistance in financing what we need to do, because we are taking the steps to address those and to build our resilience as we need to.
Thank you, Ricky. I'll let Yannick have the last word.
It was simply to react on the adaptation being context-specific. It's true, but at the same time, we need to be able to come with global adaptation standard. We need to change the existing infrastructure investment appraisal methodologies that we have that do not take into account climate risk. We need to develop business model such as HOP that can be basically emulated in plenty of countries. So with adaptation, we have the double challenges of thinking specific and thinking global.
It's a tough one, for sure. And we could probably go on about this.
Yeah.
But we won't. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here in the Barbados Pavilion or online. Thank you to Dr. Yannick Glamaric, Special Envoy on Climate Action. And thank you to Ricardo Marshall, Director of the Roofs to Reefs program. Thank you to those of us that are joining us. Thank you, Minister Munro Knight, who came in just a few moments ago, for joining us, and have a good afternoon, everybody.